the Art Department at the University of New Mexico here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Spring 2021 Gale Memorial Speaker Series. I would like to thank the UNM Art Department for providing the opportunity for the art education program to organize this year's speaker series titled Interrogating Spaces, Alternative Discourses in Art Education. So this semester, I'm also working in collaboration on the speaker series with UNM Art Education graduate students enrolled in Issues in Contemporary Art Education. So if you're in my class, you want to give everyone a wave there, we're working together on this series. Throughout this series, we have been and will be investigating pedagogical approaches in art education and how curiosity, participation, and dialogue might contribute to reimagining and rethinking our art education context. Just a few reminders, we will be using the chat feature. So if you have a question or something comes up during Jorge's presentation, you can go ahead and use the chat feature, and we'll kind of monitor that as we go, and also address some things at the end of the presentation. And also a reminder that this is a two-part presentation, so please remember to come back next week, February 17th at 6 p.m. for part 2 and the workshop portion of Jorge Lucero's presentation. So before we formally introduce Dr. Jorge Lucero, I would like to share a brief personal story. When I began pulling together a list of potential speakers for the series, Jorge Lucero immediately came to mind. Jorge's investigations of the teacher as a conceptual artist, as a breaking away from traditional pedagogical forms, is a concept I was personally interested in promoting in the speaker series. So during the summer of 2020, Jorge and I met virtually to discuss his potential presentation. And in that meeting, we also shared our professional pathways. And in the course of our conversation, we realized that we were both deeply involved with Chicago Artist Partners in Education, or otherwise known as CAPE, back in the early 2000s. So ironically, shortly after our meeting, while doing a major clean out of my old Yahoo email account, which I know you're all wondering why I'm digging out emails from 2006, but I found an October 2006 email from CAPE's education director, Scott Sikkema, with an invitation to present at a professional development workshop for teaching artists and Chicago public school teachers titled Creating and Collaborating with Students. I was invited to share my work with preschool children while working as a studio art coordinator at Chicago Commons, and Jorge Lucero would be presenting with his high school students from Chicago Public Schools Northside College Prep. So today, we are very distant from that early encounter in regards to time, and geographically, we are in two very different places and also in our professional positions. However, this evening is for me an incredible special opportunity to be in the same place again with Jorge as we continue investigating, creating, and collaborating with our students and teaching as a radical form of conceptual art practice. So in saying that, I would like to introduce Joseph Ortega, UNM Art Education graduate student, who's going to formally introduce Dr. Jorge Lucero. Oh, Jorge, I think or Joseph, you're on mute. There you
Awesome. Go. Hi, everyone. Jorge Lucero is an artist from Chicago who currently serves as Associate Professor of Art Education at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He served as the chair of the program from 2016 to 2019, and after a sabbatical has now resumed those duties. Jorge has exhibited, performed, published, and presented on his work in galleries, schools, publications, conferences, museums, community organizations, performances, and artist residencies. He has been included in major exhibitions at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, the National Museum of Mexican Art, the Chicago Cultural Center, the Hyde Park Art Center, and Framer Framed in the Netherlands. Exhibitions and projects that Jorge has participated in have been written about in Art Forum, Sculpture Magazine, New City, the Chicago Tribune, the Sun-Times, and the PBS Digital Studio, among others. Jorge is the co-editor of the scholarly journal Visual Arts Research and previously served as the instructional resource editor for the Journal of Art Education. He's an assistant editor for the Journal of Curriculum and Pedagogy and serves on the review boards for both the Journal of Social Theory and Art Education and the Journal of Cultural Research and Art Education. Currently, Jorge has undertaken the project of conceptual art and teaching. CA&T is a platform for looking at how new forms and inquiries of art inform teaching practice and how teaching practice is actually a sophisticated form of conceptual art practice, robustly contributing to contemporary art discourses. In August of 2020, in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, CA&T invited 39 international scholars, teachers, and artists to author 10-minute think pieces around the question, what happens at the intersection of conceptual art and teaching? The think pieces were presented back-to-back in a 6-hour and 10-minute marathon symposium that was one part academic ritual and one part art invitation. A book containing all the presentations from the Zoomposium is currently in production. Jorge received his master's degree and PhD from Pennsylvania State University and his undergraduate degree from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Prior to moving into higher education, Lucero happily taught art and art history at the Chicago Public School, Northside College Prep for 7 years.
Wow, thank you so much. That was amazing, Joseph. Thank you. And Gigi, thanks for the invitation and thanks for that great story. It's sad that we didn't stay in touch throughout the whole time, right? But it's wonderful that we're reconnected and it's just amazing how small the world is. I'm sure that I already saw actually a bunch of people in the audience that I know from so many different paths. And so I had to change the view function there so that they wouldn't make me nervous to see everybody here. But I did see you, so hi. And I am so happy to be here and to be spending this time, talking about some of these ideas and this work that is, it's in progress, right? I mean, all of it is, it's first and foremost, I think, durational work. And even though I'm going to maybe show you some touchstones or some moments where the work feels to solidify, it feels like it comes together and it maybe means something or it looks like it's representing something. Don't be fooled. It's a long trek, and the work is probably gonna never be done. So that's the best part of it, if you ask me. So I'm gonna share my screen here so that I can start to show some pictures. So yeah, as I was saying, in this presentation, I hope to walk you through a variety of iterative practices that I undertake. A lot of times the projects themselves don't really have a clean, so the whole project is open-ended, but even the little projects sometimes don't have a clean beginning and ending. They are made, they come to be sometimes because an opportunity presents itself. And I've been actively putting aside things, writing things, assembling things. And so when there's an opportunity either to have an exhibition or make a publication or give a lecture like this or something, then the pieces sort of start to come together. And then I feel like I feel like that's actually a moment of reflection for me. It's a moment where I can, by bringing the things together, I'm then able to think about what has occurred and then potentially what is next. I'm gonna actually start with something that I originally hadn't planned on doing, but I'm teaching a class right now at the University of Illinois called Teacher as Conceptual Artist. It's like a special topics class, so it's not a class that's offered all the time. And in anticipation, so we meet on Thursdays. And so this past week, I've been reading I've been doing the reading that I assigned for this week, because even though it's something that I had read before several times actually, I like to do the reading with my students just so that we can sort of like look at it together. You know, I can be almost like getting it for the first time. And the book that we're reading right now in these first 2 weeks of the class, or the should say first 3 weeks of the class, is this book called Who's Afraid of Conceptual Art? It's by Peter Goldie and Elizabeth Schalakins, two British scholars. And I was making some notations because what was assigned to be read this week was the first 3 chapters of the book. And I was making some notations in the margins of the book because they were taking a stab at giving a definition for what conceptual art has been. And yes, they talk about it specifically within that time period that we all sort of have come to recognize as an art historical moment, a conceptual art historical moment. But they also, I mean, they don't do a complete job at doing this, but they hint at something that other authors have pointed to, which is the idea that that we really are we have been maybe for the last 100 years in a sort of conceptualist moment or conceptualist era where everything has been sort of influenced by, I mean, that's a kind of big C conceptual art time period in the middle of the century, the 20th century. But you know, before that, there were things that were being made that sort of had this spirit to them. And then certainly, I mean, you could maybe even potentially make the argument that everything that has been made since then has been influenced by a conceptualist posture, if anything else. One of the things that I identified in the book here, and I just wanted sort of to present it as a kind of baseline, and this is at the risk of my students actually, some of my students actually being at the lecture today. And so they're just sort of hearing the notes that I'm going to probably bring up in class tomorrow, or that if they're being dutiful, they'll take a screenshot and they'll bring this up in class. So Goldie and Schalakins point out that conceptual art is these 12 things, right? It's ironic self-reflection. It's funny in their way of giving a definition. They say it's anti-definition. It's something that the artist knows that they're doing, that there's no accidental conceptual artists, that it's anti-medium, sometimes dematerialized. Now, I should point out actually that I don't necessarily agree with everything that they solidified conceptual art as, but I do think it's important that there's a baseline from which we sort of find resistance and then find opportunities from. So sometimes it's dematerialized, it challenges virtuosity, performance, and labor, or at least the sort of mythos of those things. The physical aspects of it, the physical manifestations of it may be the means, but not necessarily the mediums. The medium. Idea is usually the medium, obviously. Aesthetic is understood as aliveness, and that's not always perceived conventionally. So when they talk about aesthetics, they're not necessarily talking about something that's perceived. It's not necessarily always through the eyes. It is perceived somehow, but not usually in a conventional sense. The work narrative becomes essential, becomes an important part of the works. Conceptual art practice is a philosophical practice. And I actually anchor myself to this one because I feel that if what we do in institutions, either as K through 12 teachers or as higher ed teachers, if we're to think of that as a conceptual practice, we can look at the overlaps that are already occurring, and a lot of those are the types of philosophical practices that occur in the academy already, right? And then rules become material. And I put this one last because, again, it's not something that we're ruled by, but something that we react to, right? Or something that we test its pliability, the pliability of what has been, let's say, ordained, and then we ask questions of it, we make statements towards it, and we find where it resists and where it opens up, and then we go from there as artists. So I'm just going to talk through works, actually, and I hope that in some way or another, this idea of the teacher as the conceptual artist emerges from the works, the things that I have been very fortunate to make in one way or another, mostly in and out of institutions and around institutions, but sometimes apart from them too. This is a piece, I always like to start with this piece. It's called Papeles Gratis, free documents, because it's really, I don't really make a ton of objects actually. And this is really one of the only objects that I've ever really like constructed, or I should say that I've recently constructed, not ever constructed, that I've recently constructed. And what this piece was, it was 3 books with blank pages, where at the bottom it just said Papeles Gratis, free documents. And then on the other side, it said just my name and the date, right? And the question that's asked in this sign is, ¿Quién requiere documentos? Or who requires documentation? And it's sort of a double question. This piece was actually shown at this was the piece that was shown at the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago, in Pilsen. And it sort of asks, the double question that it's asking is a question about documentation to be in a place legally, but also documentation to exist as a valid form of production or a valid form of work, right? So that in conceptual art, we're usually checking for the documentation or checking the documentation. And that's part of the way, even if it's minimal, even if it's a bad photograph or a story that gets told or gets passed down. This is an important aspect of how conceptual art sort of has currency, right? Validity. But sort of in the same turn of phrase, I was trying to think about my own personal story, right? And how for a very long time, our family sort of lived under the shadow of not having proper documents in this country, and trying to figure out, you know, how valid you were, or you know, whether or not you had the same worth, right? Or whether or not you could prove that you existed, right? And this is actually a central question for me in most of my work, is like, when is it what, and how do things fold into each other to become 2 things at the same time? So the way that I work is usually, I work very quickly sometimes. And like I said, I have these long projects that are ongoing, that I start them at one point. Like if I find a way to make a gesture, and if it's a quick way to make that gesture, then I just start folders of that kind of gesture. And then this one in particular is the one where I just take any magazine or any advert that comes to the house. And usually when we're just going through the mail, I'll be going through them and folding the pages. And if I see anything that sort of pops out or that I kind of like, I scan them. And even sometimes when there's things that I don't think are that interesting, I scan them anyway, because sometimes the scan in and of itself becomes very interesting. There's no cutting, no gluing on any of these collages. It's just the one page torn out of, you know, a Land's End catalog, or you know, whatever comes to the house, and then just folded. So again, it's a quick iterative process. It's like a drawing process. It's a way of thinking. And every time an opportunity, and so, I mean, I think one thing that needs to be paid attention to here is that my primary occupation, meaning how I occupy most of my time, is in and around the classroom, and everything that goes into working in a school, right? Taking care of the fun stuff, you know, the being with other people, and then the not fun stuff, which is like all the bureaucracy that goes into being in a school building, right? but at the same time trying to figure out how not to have kind of a dual life or a split life where I'm, doing this thing that occupies my time the majority of the time, and then trying to figure out a way to make something else in some other time, especially because I'm married and we have 4 kids, and those are time consuming things that I don't wish to prioritize art making over, right? So I have to find the cracks. I have to find the places in my daily existence where these works can then be made. This is a series of works that was made because we moved to a new house and we had, and I'm not afraid to say it, AT&T, and the internet service really sucked. And it made everything load just that much slower. And so whenever you went on Instagram, what would happen is the images would take about 3 seconds to load. It was irritating. We switched internet providers. But in that moment where we were, that week and a half when we had that slow internet, I decided that I would just take screen captures of everything that came across my screen that wasn't loading fast enough. And so I ended up turning this into a series. There's hundreds of these, and I'm only showing you a few of them. But these are the slow Instagram pieces. What I would then do is I would post them back onto Facebook, which this was unintended, but people were telling me that this was causing them an incredible amount of anxiety because everybody was waiting for these images to load, and of course they didn't. These were then shown at Tiger Strikes Asteroid in Greenville, the Greenville version of that collective, and they were all shown on a really small iPhone, an old iPhone, and they were just on a loop. So this is primarily the thing that I investigate right now, and it's this thing I call school as material. Sometimes I call it school as material. Sometimes I call it teacher as conceptual artists. I have other names that I sort of shift around. The school as material part of it is the one where I'm actually literally trying to find the pliability of being in a school all the time. So these are images that I make from, there's 2 ways that I make them. One is I either find books that have similar color spines, that's the red ones on the side, or when I'm trying to put together a syllabus for a course, I keep all of those books in a pile. And then eventually I just make the pile. I mean, it's a very clean line that I make on one side. I take a picture, and then, when I have an opportunity to show these, you show them sideways so that they look like they're floating shelves. Another thing that I have gotten in the habit of doing is making these kind of drawing arrangements whenever I have to hang something up at school somewhere. So if I have a poster that I make for something, or I have an advert that I have to put up for a class or something that I'm teaching, and as you can see in the image on the left, most pegboards at the university look like this. This is how people put stuff up, and it's usually an entire semester's worth of advertisements that go up there. So what I usually do is I go and I take everything down, and then I put everything back up. I don't edit it. I don't get rid of stuff that's outdated. I just put everything up. I put my thing up. And then I take a picture of it so that I have this collection of these kind of, I like to think of them as my little push-pull abstract expressionist drawings in the hallways. And then of course they fall apart as the days go by because people don't see them actually. This is a series of drawings that was made when I was invited to give a lecture to a very large class at the university, had about 150 students in it. And I knew that very few of them were from art education, I should say. And I was supposed to talk about the current state of art education, or where art education was. I didn't really know how I was going to keep everybody's attention. I asked the professor, how does this usually go? And he told me that, they're usually on their computers and stuff like that. So large lecture hall, it's to be expected. So I just decided to lean into that. I made a worksheet, and on this worksheet, I just said, you don't have to listen to me. All you need to do is doodle on this page. So I basically was trying to lean into the distraction of somebody talking at you. And then we collected all of the worksheets at the end. And, the greatest thing about the whole thing was that a lot of the things that I was talking about, those ended up appearing as doodles in the worksheets, right, on the pages. So, just sort of points to the fact, I mean, obviously young people, it reveals something that we should all be very aware of, is that, young people or people in general, they just listen, people listen in different ways, right? So just because someone's not making eye contact, that doesn't necessarily mean they're blowing you off or ignoring you, right? And I just decided to engage them in a different way too. This is a piece that, so again, these are all, we're like trying to test the materiality of what happens in schools. I had to give some presentations or some lectures at a conference at the University of Cincinnati. And when I put in my proposal, I said that I would like to give all 3 of my conference presentations at dawn. And I wanted to put them into a series called Dawn Lines. And they said yes. They were very excited. The conference organizers were very excited. And then about 10 days before the conference was to happen, they wrote and they said, actually, the conference where the conference is being held doesn't open till 8:30. So can you give your lectures at 8:30? And I was like, I wrote them so that they could be given at dawn. So instead, what I had to do is I rented this Chevy Suburban, this truck, and I gave the lectures in the outside of the lecture center, or the conference center. I made these really beautiful silkscreen posters. I had a colleague of mine help me make these really beautiful silkscreen posters, and we posted them all over the conference site. And it was really interesting because nobody came to the first lecture or the second lecture. I gave the lectures. But by the second day, everybody was talking about these lectures that I was giving in the middle of the morning. Everybody said they couldn't come, right? Because they were saying like, oh, we went drinking yesterday, things that people do at conferences. But on the last day, 4 people came to the lecture. So I was able to give them the lecture, and that one even had a little bit of there was a driving component to it. So we went to go look at some things too. This is a piece that, and this is in the same vein, right, of these works, this trying to think about the things that we do as teachers as a kind of material, and folding these practices into each other. So, obviously one of the things we want to be doing is reading. It's a difficult thing to do if you don't have a ton of time, and theoretical books are even harder to read because they are sometimes not written in a way that you're meant to read them casually, right? Or even when you're tired or something. So my friend Alberto Aguilar, my really good friend, longtime really good friend Alberto Aguilar, was in an exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And one of the pieces that he made was this bed. And he invited me to do a performance on the bed. And so I made this piece called Guest Lecture All Day Long, where for continuous days, I just brought all these books and I was just reading them. Whether anybody was there or not, I was reading them aloud, because for me, reading aloud is the easiest way to read heavy text, the thick documents. But if anybody ever wanted to, they could lay down on the bed, and then I was reading to them. We discussed the books and stuff like that. So it's like it's kind of a longer story, but it was inspired also by a very young girl, a 12-year-old girl who I saw give a lecture at an education conference, and she was homeschooled, and she was talking about how she didn't call it this, but she was talking about how the bed was a site for pedagogy. And she was talking about how her mom read to her, how she did math, in bed with her dad, and how, anytime you wanted a snuggle, you could have a snuggle. And so it really opened up this, rectangle that we all have at home as into like a bit of a stage and a classroom in it also. There's this thing that I do with my students. It's called Teach Anything. I teach a methods course, which is a class where you are supposed to teach other young people how to become teachers. I took a guess very early on when I had to teach this class, and it was that maybe they already knew stuff about teaching, and that I shouldn't presume that they knew nothing about teaching. So the very first thing that we do in this class is I give them each 25 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on what size the class is. And I say, you can just teach whatever you want in those 25 minutes. And it doesn't even have to be art related. So, we do it very fast. We spend about, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, with everybody coming in and doing their Teach Anything project. I don't give them any directions. I just say, just as long as you're teaching from your expertise. And we've had hundreds at this point of examples of people, young people mostly, they're not all young, but mostly young people, developing teachers who still are maybe in their head thinking, I'm not a teacher and I'm here to learn how to be a teacher. They actually show up and then they do everything that teachers do, right? All the great things that teachers do, actually. So here's a picture of Carla teaching us CPR or Heimlich maneuver. Here's a picture of we're being taught how to give proper shoulder massages. Here's an image of a student teaching us the choreography to Michael Jackson's Thriller. Here's a student who is teaching us how to do the correct kind of stretches before you go for a long run. Here's a student who taught us how to identify different kinds of clouds by making us these little cloud viewfinders with little, taxonomic images around the viewfinder. Now that we've been on Zoom, we've still been doing them. Yoga is a popular thing that gets taught. Here's a student who taught us what was open and where you could study even in the middle of the pandemic and how you could do it safely with having gotten your COVID test and social distancing and all that. Here's a student, a great student this year who gave us a presentation about the connection between lawns and class and the history of that. Here's a student who walked us through an entire anti-bullying campaign, a student who taught us all about resins and different price points and where you could get them. Of course, a student who taught me more than anybody how to post to TikTok. But the idea really is, how much do you already know? And it turns out they know everything. Because they've been in school, or should I say they've been students probably since the day they were born, and they've continued to be consumers of education, and they've continued to be participants in their own education. So it turns out they know how to do demonstrations, they know how to do call and response, they know how to ask critical questions, they know how to take you on a field trip, they know how to put together a lesson, they know how to do all of the things that we sometimes say, like, well, let's teach them these things, right? And then we have a catalog. At that point, we have a catalog of things that they're really good at. And we sort of did it through this kind of performance gesture. I might speedy through some of these just so that we don't have to spend too much time on each and every one of them. But these are just other examples, right? So I was very fortunate to be invited to a few years ago to give a lecture at BYU in Utah. And they surprised me by saying, tomorrow we're taking you to the sun tunnels, which if you know the distance, they're 4 hours away from Provo, right? So they had two 15-passenger vans. They said, on the way there, you're gonna ride with undergraduates, and on the way back, you're gonna ride with graduate students. And they said, just teach them something or hold school for that time. So I was like, well, 4 hours, right, of having to teach. So what I did was I brought the original art forum that actually contains all of Nancy Holt's writing from the year right after the sun tunnels were installed. And what we did was we read it on the way there, and mind you, no one had visited them, even though they all lived there. No one had, other than some of the professors, no one had visited them. So on the way there, the undergraduates read the document, and then on the way back, the graduate students read it. And so we were able to sort of have this discussion where on the way there, we didn't know what we were going to see. We didn't have that sort of context for it, but we were getting this work narrative from Nancy Holt. And then on the way back, it was the reverse, right? So just a sort of way of playing with the idea of taking a field trip, but then also holding kind of a mobile school. I do this thing called the Jorge Lucero Study Collection, which is, in all honesty, what it is it's my office. But the way that it started was that when I got the job at the University of Illinois, I was given an office. It was in the main corridor of the art school, but that main corridor is actually filled with offices. And most of the time, understandably, the doors are closed either because professors are not there or because you're having a meeting or something. So, you know, if you're a student, you're walking through that corridor, you're not necessarily seeing the school, right? You have to go to the 2 floors above it, or the floor underneath it. And that's how it was when I started there. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to see if I could figure out a way to make this space more porous. And so I decided to make 2 pieces. One was this one, Office's artwork, and the other one was Split My Lunch. And Office's artwork is pretty self-explanatory. It was just like the room, right, with everything in it. And then Split My Lunch was a piece where every Tuesday I would bring a double lunch, and whoever showed up at like 12:20 or something like that, I forgot exactly what time it was, then I would split my lunch with them. And this was a way that I got to know students, faculty, people who worked in the building. It opened the space, right, for me more than anybody. And now what happens is it's an actual, I use it as a public space. It's still my office. You can't tell, but after many years of rearranging it, I finally figured out exactly where to put my desk so that it's completely out of the way. And then the rest of the room functions as a space that people can walk into. Unfortunately, right now during the COVID, it's not open. But other times there's a regular Monday hour that it opens that people could come to it. And there's a website for it that you can visit to find out. We have not just books, but we have holdings. We have artists' works. And it's a really nice collection of artists' works. We have other kinds of artifacts. And we put this little sandwich board outside of in the hallway, and it just invites people in. Nothing happens there. There's no events. It's just an open space where people can come. We purposefully don't hold readings or screenings or events or anything like that. It's not meant to be that kind of space. One thing that did happen is I usually don't accept donations, but the maybe preeminent art historian of modern and late modern art, Jonathan Feinberg, is an art historian professor who was working at the University of Illinois. He retired and he was moving from Champaign-Urbana, and we didn't really know each other that well, but I got an email from him one day and he just said, I have some magazines and I heard you have this collection. Do you want the magazines? And I was like, sure, I'll take the magazines. But I didn't know, I went to his house. I didn't know that it was 50 years worth of 10 different subscriptions, right? So like the 10 major art magazines and 50 years worth of those subscriptions. So my car was pretty much dragging from his house all the way to the office because it was so heavy with the magazines, but we brought them all. I didn't know exactly what to do with them. Then I had an opportunity to have an exhibition, and I made this drawing where I decided that what I wanted to do was make an installation, a kind of minimalist installation that was also a library, right? So I installed all of these cabinets with all of the magazines inside of them, and then people could read them at the show. Curiously enough, on the day of the opening, the security guards were really panicking because they were worried about people touching it. That didn't matter to me. But what was really funny is that most of the people who touched it didn't really know what it was. I think they just thought it was like an information desk or something. Then shortly after that, and this is again, I just wanted the study collection to be an immersive experience. I didn't want it to go anywhere. People had actually asked me to lend them parts of it, to show parts of it. I turned all those offers down until I got this one offer from Professor Nadine Kalin at the University of North Texas, because she said, can we borrow the whole thing? And so I said, for how long? She said, for a whole semester. I want to work with a class with the study collection. So I said, yes. We packed it up and I drove it from Urbana. I drove it 12 hours to Denton, and then it was there for a whole semester, and I lived without it. And it turned out nothing happened to me. It was awesome. I lived without my books and without my study collection for a semester. And that really has prepared me to lose it altogether at some point. Anyway, it was there. The students did a ton of work. When I came back, they had all these presentations that they did out of the study collection. It was really something amazing. This is a recent piece that I did. I had the good fortune to do at Compound Yellow, which is a site. It's an artist-run space by Laura Schaefer right outside of Chicago in Oak Park. And what Compound Yellow is somebody's home. And that home has a bunch of different areas where different things happen, right? So you can see this diagram that was made here by Madeline Aguilar, where you can see that it had, a gallery space, a couple gallery space, a shop. It has a studio upstairs, has this garden. It's super active. If you can get yourself on the Compound Yellow website, you'll see some of all of the amazing things that they do there, including things that have to do with horticulture, music. They have this library that's, I think, is mostly temporary services, books, workshops that they have, just like an amazing overflowing energy ball of stuff that happens, community arts practice. And Laura invited me to do something. She wanted to know if there was a way that we can install or do something that was simultaneously an educational thing, but at the same time, a show of some kind, right? And if there could be some autonomy to it, so that there wouldn't have to be this constant upkeep of how do we put it together? How do we, install something? If there could be some type of autonomous function or way of it functioning. And we were thinking, Laura and I actually were thinking about these little museums that you see all over the country that are usually unmanned, like there's no people working in them. You usually see them in forest preserves or on the side of the road or something, or sometimes embedded in other businesses where you might get history of the place, you might get artifacts, you see really quirky things, but there's not really a person manning it, right? So this is what I made, the Your Stuff Museum. The Your Stuff Museum had a sign that was outside of Compound Yellow, and inside what it was all of these glass cases that people could show their stuff in. And this is Chris Santiago's collection of anime figurines and Gundam sculptures that he's put together. He has a collection of small books and things that he's collected, cameras and stuff. And what we did was we provided 3 documents. The first one was how to curate your stuff. The second one was how to make an installation of your stuff. And the third one was how to create educational programming for your exhibition. Because the only thing we asked people was you can install your stuff. Obviously, you got to take care of the space. We just want some documentation, even if it was just one picture. And most importantly, we would like you to hold one instance of educational programming in the space. So that could be, a lecture, it could be a little tour of the stuff that you have, it could be a workshop, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, we had some participants. This sort of all culminated into this. So again, Teacher as Conceptual Artist comes and goes. There's a lecture that I gave in 2013 at the Museum of Contemporary Art that sort of became the spark of where a lot of this stuff happened. They recorded that lecture, they put it online. It's still online, I think. And somebody who is now a friend, wasn't somebody that I knew at that time, but he was a professor at the University of the Arts in Amsterdam, contacted me, said he had heard that lecture, and he wanted to offer me an artist residency at their university for a semester. And so we did this project. And these are the 5 points actually that I had brought up in the lecture that I gave at the MCA. When I was talking, again, it was just a smaller version of this lecture that I'm giving right now, which was that I was trying to figure out exactly where the overlaps were between conceptual art and teaching. And I had identified these 5 things, the institution as material, energy as accumulation, which you've seen in some of the things that I've shown you, closeness. This was mostly a relational component, co-construction, which seems relational, but it really doesn't always have to be a human to human. It's just making things alongside and with other things, with other parameters. And then maybe the most important one, and the one that I'm still the most excited about, and the one that I haven't yet cracked, and maybe I will never crack it, but it's this idea of invisibility. And this one really has to do with some ideas that I have about particularly really long artworks and how they speak into the really long project or the really long practice of being a teacher, of being devoted sometimes for 30 plus years to that, I hate this expression, but you know what, it's sort of a shortcut to say boots on the ground, type of work, right? I don't like that expression to describe teachers, but I think you know what I mean when I say that, right? It's like there's some real dynamism. There's real problems. There's real relational guff that you have to get into, right? It's real material. It's real relational material with significant opportunities for there to be true affect or a true change, right, in the world. And the most interesting part about it is that it's not even change that you get to witness. And this is a little bit where the invisibility thing comes in. Like sometimes it's something that you get to participate in. Maybe you're the planter of the seed. Maybe you're the tiller of the seed. Maybe you water it or give it a little bit of light. Maybe you are the person who gets to reap the fruit of a bunch of people's labor. But more likely than not, we don't get to see that whole practice altogether. And the way that sort of speaks into some conceptual art practices, or the potential within conceptual art practices, for me is mind-blowing as an artist, actually. The ability to be able to take some of that slowness into the practice that I've taken on as an artist. So the residency that we did in Holland involved a bunch of things. It had a lecture, it had workshops where I was working with 14 teachers from the northern part of Amsterdam, which is, was super interesting because a bunch of the teachers were working with students of color there, right? With students who had immigrated from the Middle East and a lot of refugees, right? We even had one teacher from Chicago partner up with a teacher from Amsterdam, and the kids were not Zooming, maybe they were Skyping back and forth. I think they're probably Zooming actually at that point. They were Skyping back and forth to each other, and the similarities were uncanny, right? Like the similarities between the type of discrimination that is suffered by, kids in Pilsen and kids in this northern part of Amsterdam was just like, it was pretty unbelievable. Anyway, there was all sorts of things that then happened. There were sculptures that were made outside with things that were fun. There were workshops that were held indoors where they were making these portraits with everything that was in their bag. There was this entire dialogue that went back and forth through Facebook and all of the participants, all of the teachers that were up there. There was interventionist work that was made. There was work that was made thinking about the physicality of the spaces. And then they started taking all of those practices into their own works, into their own practices, into the same things that they were doing with other artists and other communities that they were involved with. There was this poster that got designed based on this list. I'll show you the list first. I had made this list called Make School Material, where I was sort of trying to think of all of the ways that school could be turned into material. And then the fine, amazing folks at the University of the Arts in Amsterdam gave this to a couple of really amazing Dutch designers, the same people who made the catalog for the Stedelijk Museum. And they created this poster. And the poster is like it folds into 4 things. So it's also like a little booklet, but then it's also perforated. The different parts are perforated so they can be torn apart, and it can be turned either into a game or into like fortunes or prompts or something. I mean, we didn't dictate how it could be used, but people were using it. We don't have any more of those. I'm so sorry. I wish I had more, but we ran out. And then there was an exhibition also. And I wanted to just show you this one last picture because this was one of the teachers that worked with us. Her name is Ella Jonker. She ended up doing, she moved, or she did like she was teaching in Bangladesh, and she ended up doing some of these same projects and some of the same things that we were doing in class there with her students. She sent me these wonderful pictures, and I always like to show them because they're just, I'm so proud of how it sort of emanated in this way. One of the things that we made one of the main things that sort of has been teased out of that residency was this Going Dutch Salad piece, which was just like a set of directives. It was a set of rules on how to, as a group, bring things together in order to make a salad. So everybody was sent out with very, very specific and also very open types of directives. And then they were gone for like 45 minutes. And then when they came back, everybody got together and we cooked and we made the salad, which, by the way, at the Breitner Academy, which is the visual arts school at the University of the Arts, the most impressive thing about it was that right in the center of the building was this communal kitchen, right? So if you're ever in a situation where you get to put any input into how the art school should look, or the school for that matter, try to figure out if you can put communal eating and communal making, like food making spaces together, because what it did to our time together and what it did to the way that we were able to exchange ideas with each other it can't be measured. That Going Dutch Salad was actually published in this book, Wicked Arts Assignments, which just came out earlier. I'm just putting a little plug in here. It's a great little book published by Valise, which is a really lovely Dutch press. And all of the directives are in that book. Not that long ago, right before the pandemic, I was invited to the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. to work with some teachers, like 36 teachers. And what we decided to do was, well, I was supposed to do professional development with them, which is like, typically it's like a quote unquote expert comes and then he does either a workshop or he gives something, right? Like a takeaway is a very popular way of putting it. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to, again, with the same idea that maybe is in Teach Anything, is like, what is it that everybody holds already? And maybe this idea is in a lot of the things too, right? The Your Stuff Museum has this too. There was a piece that I'm not going to talk about tonight, but the Barack Obama Presidential Library, which is another thing, which is like people have expertise. They have something to say. They have stories to tell. And sometimes all they need is a bracket or a place to put it. So what we did was, instead of me giving them a professional development, I gave a little lecture about expertise at the beginning, and I called it Teacher as Artist in Residence. And then what we did was I had made these links on my website where people could go and very easily, and I'm not a web person, so this was done very like rudimentary. You could then go and just type things into them, and then when you hit send, it would go straight into this Google Doc that I had, set up for it. And we just wrote a whole book in one night. We wrote it like 165-page book in one night of teacher expertise, right? I gave them like 6 guiding questions, and each one of them wrote to those questions. And it's just a beautiful co-written expression of everything that was contained, or everything that was brought together in that room in December, I think it was. I'm coming to the end here. When the pandemic started, I was right at the beginning of starting this project, Conceptual Art and Teaching. And I wanted to, I had been given some money by my university to be able to hold a symposium in person. And that was not going to be possible because of this, what we're going through. And the symposium was actually supposed to happen now in the spring. But I just thought, well, I'm not going to be able to do it. So why don't I just do it right now, like do it like in 3 weeks. So I sent out invitations to about 55 different people, and 39 people accepted my challenge. I think it was 4 weeks actually. My challenge was write 1,000 words on this question: what happens at the intersection of conceptual art and teaching? And these 39 scholars all showed up, and we did 10-minute presentations back to back to back to back. We did 6 hours and 10 minutes of presentations, and people just like, they took it and they ran with it, and they did some amazing stuff. I can show you, I won't show you the whole thing because and make collage.
Can you see me just fine?
This sort of gives you a hint.
Between nothing at all and something possibly dangerous and potentially transformative.
So I started small. I proposed to teach this concept. to study that awful form of a thought. But there's on considering what happened. First, navigating the log, click.
Rachel Harper.
1988. 23. More than always a clear fact.
And into the real world, right?
And with that, malleability. We believe that exploring crudeness always needs to be enacted with others.
Truly not part of the year.
Well, I won't show it all to you, but those are just some examples of all of the different people who participated. What was amazing about it is there was just as many K through 12 practitioners, K through 12 teachers who were like really interested in buying into this idea, or even thinking it, like really mushing it around in their head, this idea of the overlap of teaching and conceptual art. And there was professors too, and artists. So it was a mix of people, museum educators too. Now we've made a book, and these are just I'm showing you 4 spreads of the book. We're shopping it around right now. We already have a proposal written for where we, for getting it published, and we have some money to do it. But the issue is we don't want it to get published by an academic press. We want it to get published by an art press. And what we liked, or what we ended up doing, was everybody who participated gave us the different images that were part of their essays. There was about 101 images total. And what we did was we hired an artist, a woman named Lydia Ahn, and she reinterpreted every image in the book as a pencil drawing. And so these are all her original drawings based on the drawings that were, or based on the images that were given to us. And this is the last thing I'm going to show you. It's a completely incomplete thing. But I'm really excited about it, and so I'm showing. This is actually maybe the first time I'm showing it publicly. I'm just going to show it because I got to get to work on it. This is a colleague of mine who is a professor now at Rowan University. Used to be at Kent State University. Walter Gershon. He invited me. I won't tell you everything because some of it's a little bit a secret. But anyway, he wrote these great essays. And about this project that he did with young people, where he was doing sound art with them in order to learn science concepts. And he sent them to me, and he said, I want to make a book that has the essays in it, but also is an artwork and has like an entire art, like is simultaneously an artwork and a collection of essays, or maybe a report out on this project. And so I've been making these drawings, and this is just a sampling of the drawings. I've been making these drawings, and we just got, I don't know, it might be too dangerous to say this, but we just got a contract for it through MIT Press. So that is hopefully going to come out, at some point when within maybe a year and a half or something like that. But yeah, so it's just the next step. Again, I think it contains a lot of the things that I'm interested in, the sort of iterative practice, the making as you go practice, the trying to find the pliability of the materials, trying to find the pliability of the questions that you're asking, trying to figure out how things double up on each other and allow you to continue to be a teacher and an artist at the same time without having to sort of implode or explode or take anybody down with you. So it's my pleasure to have been able to give you this, and thank you.
Yay.
And now I'm going to turn on my view here so I can see everybody, because now there's no need to be nervous. But if anybody has questions or wants to talk about whatever you're doing, I'm happy to listen.
There was actually a question in the chat from one of our art education students here at UNM about the museum, the Self Museum.
The Your Stuff Museum? Yeah.
Your Stuff Museum. Bren, do you want to ask that question?
Sure. So I was like curious about like how you were doing like the exhibits, like people like sign up for a time, or they just like come in, move everyone else's stuff out of the way and split their stuff up. Like how does that work?
Yep. So there was so I'll tell you the funny part first and then the sad part. So the funny part was that we made a document with all of the sort of, it was sort of like a frequently asked questions type of document that gave all of the parameters and all that. And actually the first guy who showed in it, Chris Santiago, he said it was longer. His joke was that it was longer than the Apple agreement, the thing you have to sign when you get a device. It just had all of the different things. It talked about like setting up, taking down. Again, the whole point was to make it as autonomous as possible so that people could bring stuff in, set it up, take it down. You had to clean and leave it how it was and all that. You couldn't like destroy it or anything. That didn't last very long. I mean, after a little while it started, because again, compound yellow is on somebody's property, right? So, I mean, Laura, who's the woman who's the director of Compound Yellow, you know, she was still minding her spaces, right? Her sites. So it ended up being, it got really tricky as soon as there was one person who didn't want to play along, right? I'm not talking about Laura. I'm talking about somebody who was participating, who was a sort of bad, let's call them a bad tenant, you know? So it did get tricky. I think what it reveals, I mean, not that we're always trying to see a silver lining in all these things, but I think what it reveals is the nature of these types of projects, maybe the nature of everything that I do, which is that when you're dealing with human beings, that's always the potential is there for something like that to happen. And so part of the materiality of that is to negotiate it, to figure out how to come back to a point of reconciliation as opposed to get angry or get destructive or get, you know, and when I say destructive, I mean towards others or yourself or towards the physical world, you know?
Thank you.
Can I just say something, how interesting Ren, I think, is in that's where she teaches from. Space.
That's your space, yeah.
Yeah. Where she's student teaching. That's
I think I may be looking at a lot of people's classrooms right now. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, Mark Fisher. So see Mark Fisher there. Those were his books in Compound Yellow, the temporary services books. So shout out to those. You can get a bunch of those online.
Oh.
Thanks, Jorge.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. One of my students is here too.
Awesome.
I tried to push it.
Thank you so much.
I mean, it's a thing we can do, right? We can visit each other's lectures.
It is, yeah.
From all over the place.
Yeah. This is I'm calling it the golden age of going to people's lectures.
Yeah. Is there a couple other can you read that, Janice? Can you read that, Jorge?
Let me see. Yeah, sure. Unless Janice, do you want to come on and say it for yourself?
Sure, I'll say it. I've been on the screen all day, so I just don't apologize. Teaching all day, and then we had a meeting. I have been thinking, and I have been thinking about this, especially a lot today, because I had I feel like today I had a very performative lesson. I've been thinking about a lot how like the performative aspect of teaching and how it's centered in more of like a conceptual center rather than the performance, tying it back into how to engage the students and how to like wake them up or to lure them in. And so I just want to get your perspective on that. It's a very fresh thought in my mind. So, you know, It's just a conversation and how it ties in.
Well, I mean, my instinct is to say, like, don't try to do that. Like maybe is there something kind of nice also about, well, I think maybe the answer is no, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, is there something kind of nice about being sleepy together on Zoom or being tired together on Zoom? The reason I'm saying that is just because when we were watching when my wife and I were watching the inauguration celebration after Joe Biden got elected. There was like this tiny little clip where there was this teacher who spoke, and I think she was just introducing something, but we had seen this woman before on the internet, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and she was really like putting on a TV show every single day, right? Like she had lights, puppets, segments, activities, like all this stuff, right? I don't even think she was an art teacher or anything, right? And it's super impressive. Like when you see a little clip of somebody doing all of that, you think, wow, this person is bending over backwards for, it's totally inspiring. It's bending over backwards for their students and stuff. But I've been teaching through Zoom since March, and my game is nowhere as close or at the level that this woman's is. And I feel like I'm putting in for every half hour or 45 minutes that I'm teaching, that I'm on the screen, I'm putting in 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours, of prep time, of scripting, of trying to, things that, because normally when you're in the classroom together, there's that sort of, some of that stuff gets fabricated in the space itself, right? You don't have to come prepped in that way. And part of it is because you don't want to feel like you're wasting anybody's time, right? Mm-hmm. That's on the screen. Everybody's tired of being on the Zoom, so you don't want to waste anybody's time. But at the same time, because it's very hard to do that kind of just being with each other on Zoom, right? Especially if you don't know each other that well, or, whatever. So I unfortunately do think that there is a kind of, I would call it maybe not performative aspect that has emerged because of the Zoom thing, but a production thing that we've kind of had to develop. And I'm wondering if we can't just pay attention to some of all of those things that we think are going wrong or that we want to avoid, and instead of trying to get rid of them, maybe magnify them, maybe figure out, and not for the sake of doing something productive. Just for the sake of seeing what it looks like magnified, seeing what it looks like when you play with it a little bit. I could give you one example, and this is also in that Wicked Arts assignment. So the very last year that I taught in the high school, I had a group of freshmen, and they were really talkative. They were super nice, but really talkative, and didn't really get a lot of stuff done because they loved each other so much. They talked to each other so much. And one day I was going home, and I was really thinking about them, and I was really kind of getting crushed by the fact that things that would have just taken 1 week were actually taking 3 weeks to do. And at the same time, I didn't want to police them. I didn't want to come in and say, hey, I want you guys to be quiet and get to work, because I didn't want to have that kind of art room either. So I just decided to lean into the talking. And so we made a piece called Eating, Talking, and Watching TV. And basically the premise of the piece, just to sort of tell it really quick, was that I asked how many students, I didn't know how to knit, but I asked how many students knew how to knit, and it was about half the class. So I bought knitting materials, and one half of the class taught the other half of the class how to knit. And then we just spent we spent 3 weeks watching Freaks and Geeks and eating donuts and talking. But the only rule was that you can't stop knitting. Just keep knitting the whole time. And you didn't have to knit anything. You didn't have to knit socks or scarves or anything. And so we just ended up with a bunch of swatches of yarn and of sewn pieces together. And it was a painting class to top it all off. So then we ended up hanging everything up on the wall. We made this enormous painting made out of pieces of, sewn, or I should say knitted, swatches of color and stuff like that. And then we were able to talk about painting and how that is the thing that gets reinvented all the time. It really turned into a very nice painting lesson, if you can imagine. But it came from the idea of this thing that I wanted to, that instinctually as a teacher, or maybe as an adult, wanted to kind of crush or quell. I just said, how is that something that we could work with, which was the talking. And then we made that piece. So maybe there, I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe there's just opportunities to find materials that we weren't expecting before, like tiredness or Zoom exhaustion or whatever.
I'm always really fascinated also with what happens on the Zoom, like how sometimes people become frozen,
Yeah.
or the speech is changed. I think that that's something that could be really interesting.
Yeah.
To focus.
Yeah, or bad lighting or things that are in your room.
Or people that show up.
There's just so many opportunities to do things that I think if we were not on Zoom, we wouldn't be able to do them. We wouldn't even think about them.
Hi.
Hi, Gina.
Gina Medina Gay in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I just want to say this was very inspiring. You probably hear that word a lot, but I have to say it. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Lots to think about.
Thank you. And stay in touch. Like I'm a person who's easy to find and likes having the conversation. So if anybody wants to send an email or get in touch through all of my social media tags are conceptual art and teaching. It's not my name. So like my Facebook and my Instagram are both conceptual art and teaching. But yeah, I love continuing the discourse because I know that everybody's doing it differently. And I'm a student of, curiously enough, I'm a student of teaching, not because I'm a teacher, but because I'm an artist. Like I want to see how people are taking up that material on a day-to-day basis with all of their particular challenges and possibilities.
I have a question about there's so many things my mind is reeling. I'm a professor of early childhood and an artist, and I'm starting to work with Gigi on some things together, and I haven't really had the opportunity where I am to engage with a lot of artists, so this is pretty exciting. I love the idea. I mean, I do think that I've always felt like a lot of everything that I've done as an artist comes from, it's all conceptual, whatever the material. I love the idea of idea as material. But one thing that kind of struck me when you were going through a lot of your projects was the one that was the library you set up in that museum. And it got me thinking about, working with early childhood and this approach we call the Reggio Emilia approach. And we set up provocations. So we set up materials in a way that to me it's like an invitation. It's like a feast almost, like you can't resist coming and engaging with. And where ideally there's no need for you to say anything or tell how to do anything. And I was kind of struck by you kind of sort of very lightly brushing over, like people just walked by and thought it was a desk, and like it's a provocation, but people didn't get it. And so how does that fit into your idea as material?
People not getting it?
Yeah.
That's the story of my life. I mean, like, again, I always look for this moment of overlap, like where one thing that I've learned from being a teacher, and particularly from being a high school teacher, and then from being a parent of teenagers, is that people not getting it isn't always like a personal thing against me.
I'm not meaning it as a personal.
No, I know what you mean, but like the temptation is there, right? Like especially as an artist, the temptation is there to say, I intended this, and then they're not understanding it, right? Or they're not getting it, right? But I feel like there's a part of who I am as a pedagogue that has informed my sensibility towards that expectation as an artist, so that now I feel less compelled to worry about whether or not people are getting the thing that I'm doing or even respecting it for that matter. And I'm more interested in, I get really curious about the sort of misfires or the way that the way that people don't understand it, right? And not in a kind of cynical way either, you know, where I'm like thinking, oh, these dummies, right? It's more like what is it that is going through this person's brain or even in their sensibility, in their artistic sensibility, that is making them process this, their engagement with this in this way. Because I didn't even show you the most egregious picture. The most egregious one is one where there were a bunch of purses on top of it, like people, and I say egregious because the guards got really nervous about it, but I didn't care. I mean, it's not like, it isn't like, I mean, I didn't care, right? Because like I felt it's not like I probably would have been more worried if somebody would have like started taking the magazines and ripping pages out of them or something. And not even because I want to keep the magazines whole, but just because that seemed to be out of bounds of the way that the thing sort of was self-regulating itself. Like it was kind of set up and it was clean enough and it had little chairs in it and it was in a museum. So that sort of seems to say, don't be disorderly. But then this other thing about people like leaning on it and touching it and stuff and putting their stuff on top of it, I think the thing itself may have been saying it's okay for you to do this to me, right? Like the object itself might have been saying that. And that was interesting to me because I wasn't expecting it.
So it's kind of like informing you. It's like, I think that's how I experienced it.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny. There's a little Reggio Emilia in my like the idea of the spread of choices.
Yeah.
Like for me is an incredibly compelling way of presenting things to people. One part of it has to do with the fact that I don't want to work so hard to try to guess what people are going to do, or kids for that matter, or learners. But the other part of it is that through that kind of not wanting to take that on, I have learned so much, like so many unexpected things have happened. And so I'll take those things any day if I could just figure out a way to get out of the way. And I think the Reggio Emilia model shows that somehow.
Yeah, and it's very contextual, which is what you're all about. Yeah, neat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there was a question similar. What Tessa was at? Tessa, do you want to ask that question? If she's there. Sorry, no bandwidth. But so I guess I'll try to, Tessa was asking if you align your practice teaching art with certain pedagogies. I don't think of Reggio Emilia as a traditional K-12 pedagogy, so I'm not going to include Reggio Emilia in that.
Like if I were to tell you who do I like?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Paulo Freire, of course, you know, that's maybe my main, like the main person that when I read his writing, I feel like that, you know, the heart palpitations or whatever, like I get excited, you know, because he's putting words to the things that I have had the privilege to experiment with. And anytime somebody can articulate what you do, what you have been able to do, then it's exciting, you know. There is actually a performance group in Chicago. Well, I should say I had a great teacher at the School of the Art Institute named Matthew Gulish, and him and Lynn Hickson started Goat Island, which was a performance group in Chicago, and now they have another performance troupe called Every House Has a Door. And Matthew's teaching style, and actually for that matter, all of the Goat Island, all of the main Goat Island people, were just they transformed the way I thought about learning and teaching, right? You know, they're just very generous. They're very trusting. Like they allow everything to be more than one thing. So like nothing has to be exactly what it is on the face value. They believe in creative response as a way to have a critical mind, as opposed to having a criticizing mind in order to have a critical mind. So that when you look at something and you see it askew, instead of saying, oh, this is wrong and let's fix it, what you do is you say, what of the way that it is can be wonderful, can be a moment of wonder. And is there a way that I can echo it? Is there a way that I can take it on as part of my discourse? Is it compelling enough for me to be able to be generative from it? So it's all very, and it's not Pollyannish in any way, but it's all very optimistic and forward looking, in the best way possible, really generative, really forgiving. And their influence on me as a student, when I was a student, but then later when we became like really good friends and just collaborators, and then everything that they've written. I mean, it's at the Jorge Lucero Study Collection, we only have full collections of a few things. We have a pretty big collection of the temporary services books. We have a full collection of the Goat Island and the Every House Has a Door and Matthew Gulish's publications. And then we have a ton of John Cage publications and books too, because that's another person who has really been influential in terms of my pedagogy.
Hmm.
You know, I'm compelled to also share something with you. A group of my friends in Holyoke, Massachusetts, I think it's housed, the Mother Tongue exhibit, and it's very much a responsive piece.
Okay.
They created these panels, and then you're to come in and respond just all visually. It's pretty fantastic project that existed for a period of years back in the 90s.
Where was it again?
Holyoke, Massachusetts. I'll try to figure it out, Gigi. I mean, I've looked it up a couple times, and I think it's housed somewhere there. Okay. Mary Weinstein is a name. Yeah.
Thank you. I've written it down. I'll look it up.
So it looks like Maria has her hand up.
It's so close to the end, but first of all, thank you so much. And my question relates back to the first slide you had with the book you're reading, and like these definitions of conceptual art, and one of the, well, like, I'm simplifying, but conceptual artists need to know that they're creating conceptual art. And so I wonder if in your teaching, and like with all the age groups that you've taught, if you ever see moments where the students kind of cross over from being part of this conceptual idea to become their own conceptual artists, if that makes sense. But also, especially with some age groups, they don't know what conceptual art is. Does that disqualify it? Or like, that's what's really fascinating to me, because I teach young children, as you see things, it's like, that's such a conceptual art piece and they're just making something.
Yeah.
Well, with what you've created for your students.
I mean, for me, conceptual art is a pool of activities that happen in the world that I can pull permissions from. So like I see the behaviors of other artists, or even my colleagues and the people the artists that I know, and I think around and through their behavior in terms of like what also happens in teaching. So for me, I'm always trying to sort of piece those two things together. It's a very specific puzzle that I'm trying to it's not even a puzzle, it's a very specific field that I'm tilling there. In terms of like whether or not kids are making conceptual art or can make conceptual art, I don't know. I mean, those 12 things that I pulled from the book are the 12 points that they make. One thing I will tell you is I'm not in full agreement with everything that they say there. I think I think, so I have 4 teenagers who live in my house, and they have very active art practices, if you want to call it that. And they've had those practices for a very long time, since they were very small, and since they were very young. And there were a lot of times where they were making things that were really sophisticated in terms of, I don't mean like skill wise, I just mean in terms of the kind of conceptualizing that they were doing. I don't know that they were thinking about it in terms of this very specific discourse that I'm interested in, which I really see more as a kind of, I mean, I don't mean this in a negative way. I mean this in the most positive way possible, but I think it's a bit of an academic field, you know? And again, I mean that I actually happen to love the academy. So I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that in the best way possible. What I mean by it's an academic field is it's an area of study that, well, it's an area of knowledge and knowledge creation that requires a certain degree of study. So it requires a quote unquote literature review. And I don't mean just literature, a textual review. It involves a certain kind of diving in and getting familiar with the practices, the ideas, the potentials of it, and the edges, the fringes of it. So I don't know that there's any kids who are actually into it in that way, right? In the same way that, you know, certain branches of philosophy have yet to be touched by certain children.
No, certainly, but the nature of my question was more like, since you're teaching teachers,
Mm-hmm.
how does, I guess, like most simply, taking it from this academic like discourse and, you know,
Oh yeah, okay.
and
Yeah, that was
putting
the first part of your question, right?
right. I mean, I just thought those questions were, I thought those points were so interesting because.
So actually, I do have something to say about that part of it. That part I have very little luck witnessing, but I'll go back to the gardening analogy that I made earlier. Like, I feel very privileged to play a very small part in the continuum of every one of my students' development. And I unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where a lot of these people are full blown in their own careers. Some of them are here actually, right, in this room. So I have gotten to see them, like, let's call it, come to fruition, right, into this mode. But I'm very proud of the time that we got to spend together and the moment where our paths crossed. But I'm really hesitant about taking any credit or any kind of, like, I only see myself as having been one small moment in those people's lives, because I know that they've had other teachers and other encounters. It's a kind of, again, that's the most exciting thing about it for me, is that it's a durational gesture that I get to come in and be a part of, but I don't get to be a part of the whole thing, and I don't get to have a sense of ownership of the whole thing at all. The piece that I can maybe relate it to the most is John Cage's ASLSP, which stands for as slow as possible, and it's this composition that he made, which can be played at various speeds, but it's meant to be played as slow as possible. And there's a chapel right now in Germany that's has committed themselves to playing that one particular piece over more than 600 plus years. And they started playing it, I want to say, a couple decades ago already. They've had several chord changes, but the thing is constantly playing. Like, you can go on the internet and hear the hum of this piece playing on this organ in this chapel. And, you know, that's a piece that no one will get to see the beginning of and the end of it. You'll only get to witness this tiny little sliver. And, you know, when I see that, I aspire to that kind of practice, you know, in my own work, but also alongside every person who I get to be the privilege of being called their teacher. hope I at least hit a little bit on the question.
I think it's not a question to ask at 7:33.
Oh,
Maybe next week I can articulate
yeah. If you
a little more, because I
yeah,
think,
and I apologize myself if
no, I think a lot of it
not
is
able
like
to-
how, like with all this like intertextuality, whatever, like still at the end of the day, I'm going and teaching children who like, that's my question, is like, we're all involved in these different layers of the text or of relational
yeah.
materials. So it's like this constant back and forth, or, you know, like tilling the field, like you said. So it's more, I'm gonna, next week.
Yeah. Well, Heather, my dear friend, Heather Kaplan, I see that you responded to it in the chat there. Is there, can you speak to this?
Well,
Not to put you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like maybe.
No, so I think I don't know. I think the issue is this idea that children are not conceptual, right? That's the problem. And it happens also in socially engaged art. We think that children can't make socially engaged art, or they can't manipulate people, right? So there are other spaces where this happens. And so I start wondering, particularly, you know, what does this work do, right? Like, and who does it do it for? And I think what you're saying is it's a space for you to think, and it's a space for teachers to think. But you haven't specifically talked about the space for children to think, right? And I think that's the question that many teachers then wonder, is like, you know, that reiterative part of, well, I'm thinking, so that's a meta thought, right? So we want to take it out of the meta and bring it into a space where it's applicable to children, where it's not just an adult conversation, right? So how do we change that thinking to think about the children as artists, or teachers as meta, right? As these people who then model their teaching, right? So how do we make that visible to students, right? Like, and that's what I think is really interesting about your work is when you were working, I was thinking, this is a lot of art language that you're using, right? So it's got to be really hard when you run up against, because you're talking about teaching, not art teaching as concept, but teaching as concept. What do you do when you run up against people who are not versed in the language of art? They've got to not understand what you're saying, right? Then because they're not part of that language, right? There's a part of this that's about speaking the language of artists. And so how do you then get to the space of working with people who don't have that language? Yeah. And what is the purpose for those people?
Thank you, Heather. That's awesome. This is the way that I'll respond to that. I think it's a slow game. I'm so happy to have partners in this conversation, you being one of those people, Heather, who I've known for a long time. And it makes me relieved, actually, right? Because it doesn't make me feel like I have to take it all on myself, or that I have to figure it all out for every single population by myself, right? One. The other thing is just that I also think that these types of things, like the artist lecture or this thing that I just did, it's a misrepresentation, because it takes 25 years worth of work and production and just teases out the spectacular part, or teases out the part that we can sort of talk through or about, right? And I know that everybody here understands what I'm saying there, but there's just a lot of in-between space where hopefully the work that you're all alluding to gets to take place, right? And that's why I'm saying I'm happy that I have partners, because that's how the work happens, right? It happens in partnership with colleagues, in partnerships with students or children, even if I was working with children, and whichever population. But that's part of the reason why at the beginning I sort of started the conversation by saying this is kind of like an incomplete thing that I'm presenting here, because I know it's going to look very complete. It's going to look very polished for a variety of reasons. One is because I I know the part that I want to talk about when it comes to every single one of these moves that I'm making. But on the other hand, I also know the part that looks art-like and, you know, can be spoken to within this context, right? But I definitely agree with what you're saying and what I think Maria is saying. And I'm also, again, I can't stress enough how grateful I am that I don't have to take it all on by myself.
Yeah, that was good.
So I look forward to, I'm so grateful for all the friends who showed up and all the new people who came and all the students and teachers and colleagues who are here. And if I haven't seen you in a long time, get in touch so that we can get in touch with each other so we can connect. And then hopefully we'll see people next week.
Yeah. I think I think we have a lot, you know, a lot of it is end of the day for many of us. But I think we have a lot to take with us from tonight to, I'm sure lots of things will come up, basically is what I'm saying, for next week. So yeah, I hope everyone comes back next week for part 2. And I'm not sure what part 2 will be, but I think we're gonna figure that out. And I'm sure it'll be great. So great. Anything you want to add to finish out, Jorge, or anyone else?
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, a lot of thank yous from everyone. Excited for part 2. Thank you so much. Great. So I'm going to hang out. I have some students that I think should hang out as well.
Okay.
And everyone else will see you next week. Same time, same place, same link.
I'm just, bye everyone. Thank you. I'm Gigi, if you don't mind, I'm just downloading the chat actually, because I didn't get to look at any of them, if you don't mind. So let me just put it here on my desktop. Or actually, oh wait, here. Actually, I think you might have to send it to me. Gigi.
Okay, I will. I saved it. Yeah.
So if you could email it to me, then I'll take a look at it then.
Yeah, I'll save it.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. So
we'll meet later this. We'll meet later this week then.
I think we're meeting
next week. Next week.
I think we're meeting on Monday.
Monday, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm excited to talk. I have a lot of things I want to ask you about.
Awesome.
Anyways,
Bye,
so,
Gigi.
okay.
Take care.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay.
I can go, right, Gigi?
You can go or you can stay.
I've been here over 12 hours, so.
Yeah, you can go.
Hi, Rebecca.
Go to bed, Maria.
Thank
See you
you
later.
That was amazing.
Yeah, take care. Okay, any